Hello, and welcome back to Grave Whispers. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy whispers rising straight from the grave, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable. Dim the lights if you dare. Relax your mind. Let the outside world fade away. And let's begin. Story 1, Damien was free. At least that was what he kept telling himself. For the first time in 2 years, he could go out without asking anyone for permission. He could leave his phone in his pocket without checking it every 5 minutes. He could have a drink without worrying about angry messages, accusations, or the cold silence that always waited for him when he got home. He could walk into town with his best friend, Jason, and not feel like he was doing something wrong. That should have made him happy. It should have made him feel light. But as he sat in the first bar of the night, with music playing too loudly and people laughing around him, Damien felt something else sitting heavy in his chest. It was not guilt exactly. It was not regret either. It was a strange, sinking feeling, like the floor under his life had finally opened, and he was only now realizing how far he might fall. Jason raised his glass and knocked it against Damien's. "Come on, mate," Jason said, already smiling like the night belonged to him. "She's gone now. Time for the boys." Damien forced a small smile and took a drink. "I know," he said. "I just don't know if it was the right call." Jason almost choked on his beer. He pulled the glass from his mouth and stared at Damien like he had just said the stupidest thing in the world. "The right call?" Jason laughed. "Are you joking?" "She was awful, mate. Actually awful. She had you wrapped around her finger for 2 years. And don't even start with the weird stuff. She was literally getting you to do rituals with her, wasn't she?" Damien looked down at his drink. "It wasn't real," he said. "It was just a goth thing she was into. Candles, symbols, strange words. It was more for the look than anything else." Jason shook his head. "Mate, listen to yourself. Candles, symbols, strange words. That's not a hobby. That's how people wake up demons in horror movies. It wasn't like that." "Then, what about the rest of it?" Jason asked. His tone became more serious. "She kept a leash on you everywhere you went. She checked your phone. She asked where you were every hour. She got angry if you spoke to any woman, even at work. She made you feel guilty for having friends. She wore you down." Damien shifted in his seat. "It wasn't abuse," he said quietly. "She was just overprotective." Jason stared at him for a long moment. "Protective or not, you deserve better," he said. "And deep down, you know it." Damien did not answer. He wanted to argue, but he had already used every excuse before. He had told himself she was just insecure. He had told himself she loved too hard. He had told himself things would get better if he stayed patient. But they never did. Things only got worse. Every week, his world became smaller. Every argument ended with him apologizing. Every apology felt like giving away another piece of himself. And still, now that it was over, he missed her. That was the part he hated most. Jason leaned closer and slapped a hand on Damien's shoulder. "Tell you what," Jason said, "this is just the beginning of your new life. Tonight, we drink, we laugh, we forget her. We remind you that the world is bigger than one crazy woman in one flat." Damien let out a weak laugh. "That sounds easier than it feels. Everything feels easier after another pint. Your answer to everything is another pint. Because I'm usually right." Damien smiled properly this time. Jason grinned and raised his glass again. "We'll get these down us. have a few more, and maybe hit a club after. Something loud, something stupid, maybe even a strip club, just to celebrate your freedom. Damien's smile faded a little. I'm not sure that's a good idea. Jason groaned. Oh, come on. You don't have to do anything. Just look around. Have fun. Remember, there are other women on Earth who won't threaten to ruin your life because you smiled at a cashier. Damien looked away. The word cashier, for some reason, made his stomach tighten. Jason noticed his face and softened his voice. Mate, I'm not trying to push you into anything bad. I'm just saying, you can't sit there all night mourning someone who made your life miserable. You need one clean break. One stupid night with your best mate. Nothing serious. Just an icebreaker into the new you. Damien stared at his drink for a few seconds, then shrugged. Maybe I'd have to get a few more drinks down me first. Jason's face lit up. That's my boy. Trust me, bro. Tonight is going to be madness. The two of them ordered more drinks. They drank faster than they should have. The bar became louder, the lights warmer, and the people around them softer at the edges. Jason talked almost non-stop, making jokes, laughing at his own stories, and trying to pull Damien's mind away from the past. For a while, it worked. But once they left the bar and stepped into the night air, the memories returned. The streetlights shone on wet pavement. Cars moved slowly through town, and groups of people passed them on the sidewalks, heading from one bar to another. Jason was singing badly, swinging his arms and shouting at passing strangers like he had known them for years. Damien walked beside him, but his thoughts were somewhere else. He kept seeing his ex-girlfriend's face from earlier that day. He had gone to her flat to end things properly. He had planned what to say. He had practiced it in his head on the way there. He had promised himself he would stay calm. But the moment she realized he was leaving her, something in her changed. She had screamed at him, but it had not sounded like her. Her voice cracked and twisted. Sometimes it was too low. Sometimes it became sharp enough to hurt his ears. She had spoken so fast that half of it did not sound like English. Her eyes had looked too wide, her face too pale, her mouth pulled into a shape that did not feel human. He remembered her hands shaking. He remembered the candles still burning on the floor behind her. He remembered a strange smell in the flat, like smoke and rotten flowers. And he remembered the one sentence he could clearly understand as she threw him out. If I can't have you, no one will. The more Damien drank, the stronger those words became. They repeated in his head with every step. If I can't have you, no one will. If I can't have you, no one will. If I can't have you, come on, mate. Jason shouted suddenly, throwing one arm around Damien's shoulders. Let's go see some boobs. A few people across the street looked over. Damien pushed him away, laughing despite himself. Keep your voice down. You sound like a complete idiot. Jason pointed at him with a drunk grin. Unlike your life for the last 2 years, I'm being put to good use tonight. That doesn't even make sense. It does in my head. That's what worries me. They kept walking until they reached the club. The entrance glowed with red and purple lights, and heavy bass thudded through the open door. A large man at the entrance checked their IDs, looked them over, and waved them inside. The air inside was warm and thick. The room smelled of perfume, alcohol, sweat, and the faint burnt smell of stage lights. Music shook through the walls. Men sat at tables around the stage, some quiet, some cheering, some already too drunk to know how loud they were being. Jason entered like he owned the place. Damien followed more carefully, keeping his head slightly down. This was not really his world. He had only agreed because Jason would not stop pushing him, and because part of him wanted to prove that he could. He wanted to prove that he was not still controlled by a woman who was no longer in the room. They found a table near the back. Jason was already grinning, watching everything with wide eyes. Damien sat beside him and tried to relax, but the uneasy feeling had not left. The music was too loud. The room was too hot. The flashing lights made the corners of the place look strange. Then he saw her. She was tall, with dark brown hair that fell over her shoulders and caught the stage light like polished wood. There was something about the way she moved that pulled his attention from across the room. She was not just pretty. She had a kind of heat around her, like a flame behind glass. When her eyes met Damien's, the rest of the club seemed to blur. For 1 second, he forgot everything. Jason noticed immediately. "Oh, look at you," he said, leaning close to Damien's ear. "Go on, my son." "What? Don't play dumb. You've been staring at her like she's the answer to every problem you've ever had. Go get a dance." Damien shook his head. "No, I don't know what to say." Jason laughed. "You're not asking her to marry you. You're asking for a dance. That's literally her job. I still don't know." Jason stood and pulled Damien up by the arm. "Stop thinking. Thinking ruined you for 2 years. Go." He gave Damien a shove toward the stage area. Damien stumbled a little, then caught himself. His heart began beating faster, but with every step, he felt a small piece of confidence return. He crossed the room awkwardly, trying not to look like he was trying too hard. When he reached her, the woman smiled. "Hey," Damien said, then cleared his throat. "Do you, Hey there, cutie," she said smoothly. "You looking for a dance?" Damien nodded. "Yeah, sure, if that's cool." She laughed softly, not cruelly. "That's cool. Follow me." They moved through the room, passing tables and chairs and groups of men who barely noticed them. As Damien walked past his table, Jason lifted both fists in the air and cheered like Damien had just scored the winning goal. Damien tried not to laugh. "I didn't get your name," he said as he followed her. "It's Silver," she said, glancing back. "And you?" "Daniel," Damien replied. The lie came out so fast that it surprised him. For a second, he felt strange. Why had he done that? He had no reason to lie, but the name had slipped out before he could stop it. Silver smiled. "Well, Daniel," she said, "it's a pleasure." She led him into a private booth with red velvet walls and a large chair in the center. The music outside became muffled, replaced by a slower, heavier song coming from a speaker in the room. She sat him down, touched a button, and the music began to fill the small space. Damien's nerves grew, but so did the feeling of release. Silver moved in front of him with smooth, sharp control. Her body seemed to follow the music perfectly. Her eyes stayed on his, and after a while, Damien stopped feeling like he was in a club. He felt like he was somewhere far away, somewhere cut off from the rest of the world. The guilt started to fall from him. The chains of the last 2 years loosened. For the first time in so long, he felt wanted without being judged. He felt seen without being trapped. He felt like maybe Jason was right. Maybe this was the first night of a new life. Silver came closer and sat lightly across his lap. Damien's breath caught. He felt heat spread through him. His hands shook. He lifted one hand, unsure at first, then gently brushed it through her hair. She leaned closer, taking his hand and pressing her lips against his palm. Slowly, she moved from his hand to his wrist, then up his arm. Damien closed his eyes for a moment. A rush of pleasure and relief moved through him, stronger than anything he had felt in years. It felt wrong and wonderful at the same time. It felt like biting into forbidden fruit. Then Silver stopped moving. At first, Damien thought it was part of the act. Her mouth rested near his shoulder. Her breath felt hot against his skin. But after a few seconds, the room changed. The mood broke. The music kept playing, but the silence between them became heavy. "Silver?" Damien whispered. Something small dropped into his lap. Then another. Then another. He looked down. For a moment, his brain could not understand what he was seeing. They were teeth, human teeth, wet, red, and bloody. Damien's whole body froze. Then Silver made a sound near his shoulder. It was not a moan. It was not a cough. It was a deep, broken, wet sound, like something inside her was coming apart. Damien screamed and shoved himself out of the chair. Silver fell sideways onto the velvet seat. Her face was changing. Her lips had pulled back. Blood poured from her mouth. Her eyes bulged, then began to sink loose in their sockets. Her skin grayed, cracked, and started to peel away as if invisible flames were burning under it. Damien backed into the wall, screaming. Silver's body jerked. Her fingers dug into the velvet. Her jaw opened too wide and more teeth spilled out. Her eyes slid lower, stretching the skin beneath them in a way no human face should move. Blood ran down her cheeks from emptying sockets. She tried to scream, but the sound came out as a bubbling choke. Her skin began to melt. It ran from her face in thick, dark streaks. Her hands softened and pressed into the chair as if the velvet were swallowing them. Her bones cracked under her own weight. Her body folded inward, shrinking and twisting as blood spread across the carpet in a dark red pool. Damien did not wait to see more. He burst out of the booth and ran. His heart hammered so hard it felt like a bird trapped in his chest. He pushed past the man in the hallway, nearly fell into a table, and stumbled back into the main room. Jason was still at their table, drink in hand, smiling at something on the stage. Damien grabbed him by the arm. "We're going," he said. "We have to go right now." Jason blinked at him. "What?" "I was just about to get a dance from Jasmine." "Now," Damien shouted. People nearby turned to look. Jason's smile faded. "Mate, what happened?" Damien pulled him toward the exit. Moved, they rushed out into the street. The cold air hit Damien's face, but it did nothing to calm him. His hands were shaking. His mouth tasted like metal. Jason stumbled beside him, trying to keep up. "Dude, what the hell happened in there?" he asked, suddenly sounding much less drunk. "I don't know," Damien said. "I swear I don't know. She melted, right in front of me." Jason stared at him. "Melted?" "She started falling apart. Her teeth fell out." Her face, Damien gagged and stopped speaking. "I didn't do anything. I swear I didn't touch her like that. I didn't do anything." Jason looked back toward the club, then back at Damien. "Maybe she had some kind of medical condition," he said, but his voice cracked slightly. He tried to laugh, but it came out wrong. "That wasn't a medical condition," Damien snapped. "They're going to call the police. We have to get away from here." They hurried down the street, moving faster with every step. Behind them, the bass from the club still thudded as if nothing had happened. They passed a McDonald's with bright golden arches glowing against the dark street. Jason slowed immediately. Damien kept walking for several steps before realizing he was alone. He turned and saw Jason heading toward the doors. "What are you doing?" Damien shouted. Jason looked back like it was obvious. "Getting food. Are you insane? I'm starving. We have to keep moving." Jason was already inside. Damien cursed under his breath and followed him. The restaurant was bright, clean, and painfully normal. A few tired customers sat at tables. Workers moved behind the counter. The smell of fries filled the air. Jason stood at the counter, ordering like nothing in the world was wrong. Damien marched up beside him. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "Getting a Mackey's," Jason said. "What does it look like?" "We have no time for this. We need to act normal." "You think this is normal?" Before Jason could answer, the cashier placed a Diet Coke on the counter. Her name tag said Sarah. She smiled politely, tired but friendly. Jason reached for the drink at the same time Damien grabbed his arm to pull him away. For one brief second, Damien's hand, Jason's arm, and Sarah's fingers touched around the cup. Sarah's smile vanished. She gasped. Then she screamed. A sizzling sound filled the restaurant. Damien looked down and saw smoke rising from Sarah's arm. Her skin reddened, then blistered, then split open as if something hot were burning her from the inside. She stumbled backward, clutching her arm and screaming in pain. The smoke alarm began to shriek. People jumped from their seats. Another worker ran toward Sarah. "Oh my God." Sarah. The worker, Lisa, pulled out her phone with shaking hands. "I'm calling an ambulance." She pressed 9. Then she stopped. Her thumb stuck to the screen. At first, she looked confused. Then her skin stretched. Blood spread under her finger and across the glass. She tried to pull away, but the skin of her thumb tore and clung to the phone. Lisa opened her mouth to scream, but her mouth kept opening. Wider, then wider. Her jaw cracked with a horrible snap and dropped loose. Smoke poured from her throat. She fell forward, making a wet choking sound as her face began to collapse into a dark, bubbling mess. A third worker, Annie, stood frozen near the fryers. Then she started laughing. It began as a nervous laugh, the kind people make when fear is too big for their mind to hold. But it grew louder, too loud. It echoed through the restaurant, bouncing off the walls and machines and glass windows. Annie laughed so hard that tears ran down her face. Then she reached toward the deep fryer. "No," Jason shouted. But she had already grabbed one of the metal fry baskets. Her laughing rose into a scream as she lifted it and threw hot grease across her own face. Smoke exploded upward. Her laughter did not stop. Her skin burned and peeled while she kept laughing, louder and louder, until the sound became something inhuman. The restaurant erupted into panic. Customers ran for the doors. Someone shouted for help. The smoke alarm screamed above them. Sarah writhed on the floor. Lisa melted beside the counter. Annie laughed through the burning. Jason stood frozen, his eyes wide. "What the hell is going on?" he screamed. Damien grabbed him hard. "We need to go right now." They ran out through the smoke and into the street. They did not stop for a long time. They ran past closed shops, bus stops, alleyways, and dark windows. Their footsteps slapped against the pavement. Damien's chest hurt. Jason's breath came in rough bursts. Neither of them spoke until they reached a run-down street corner far from the main road. Jason bent over, hands on his knees. "Dude," he panted. "What the hell just happened?" "That's what happened with her," Damien said. "The girl at the club. I have no idea why." Jason looked up at him slowly. "That doesn't just happen," he said. "People don't just melt." "Oh, really?" Damien snapped. "You think I don't know that?" Jason swallowed and looked at Damien's hands. "It's you," he said. Damien stepped back. "What?" "You touched them. The dancer, then the cashier. It happened after you touched them." Damien looked at his own hands like they belonged to someone else. "No, that's not possible. What else is it?" "I didn't do anything. Maybe not on purpose." Damien's mind spun. The rituals, the candles, the strange words, his ex's screaming, her final sentence. Jason saw the realization on his face. "Her," Jason said. "It was her." "Who? Your ex, man. I told you she was evil." Damien shook his head. "No, I haven't seen her since this afternoon. That doesn't matter if it's a curse." "A curse?" Damien almost laughed, but the sound died in his throat. "Yes, a curse. What was the last thing she said to you?" Damien closed his eyes and tried to remember the chaos in her flat. The candles, the smoke, the words that sounded like another language. I don't know. She was hysterical. Most of it sounded like nonsense. "Think." Damien pressed his hands to his head. Then the words came back. "If I can't have you, no one will." Jason pointed at him. "That's it. That's the curse." The other words were probably Latin or something. "She made it so no other woman can touch you." Damien's stomach turned. "No, she couldn't. She's just gothic." Jason stared at him in disbelief. "Mate, I've met gothic girls. None of them make women dissolve into blood and smoke." "Why are you still defending her?" Damien had no answer. He sank down onto the curb and buried his face in his hands. "What am I going to do?" he whispered. Jason paced in front of him, breathing hard. Then he stopped. "I know what you have to do." Damien looked up. "You have to go back to her," Jason said. Damien's face twisted. "What?" "Hear me out. You go back to her flat. You tell her you made a mistake. You get her to believe you want her back. Then she lifts the curse. And then?" Jason looked down the street. His voice dropped. "Then we make sure she can never do this again." Damien stared at him. "No, it's either that or every woman who touches you dies," Jason said. "Do you want that?" Damien stood and walked away a few steps, but Jason's words followed him. "Every woman who touches you dies." He thought of Silver melting in the booth, Sarah screaming in McDonald's, Lisa's jaw breaking, Annie laughing through the burning grease. Then he thought of every woman he might ever meet again. A nurse, a doctor, a coworker, someone on a train who brushed his hand by accident, a stranger helping him after a fall. He turned back to Jason. His voice was barely a whisper. "How?" Jason swallowed. "I'll wait outside the door. You go in and talk to her. When you say a code word, I knock. She goes to answer it. You grab a knife and end it. Then we leave." Damien's hands began to shake. "They'll know. My prints will be everywhere. Use something over your hand. A glove, a cloth, anything. This is insane." "Yes," Jason said. "But so is everything else tonight." Damien searched for another answer. He wanted to find one. He wanted anything except this. But his mind was blank. Finally, he nodded. "Let's go." They walked through the streets toward her block of flats. The night felt colder now. Every shadow looked too deep. Every woman who passed on the other side of the road made Damien step away. terrified even of accidental contact. By the time they reached her building, both men were silent. The flats rose above them, dark windows stacked like empty eyes. Damien stared up at the second floor. Flat 207. Jason stood beside him. "Okay," Jason said quietly. "You go in. Say what you have to say. When it's time, say something loud enough for me to hear. A word she won't say by accident." "What word?" Jason thought for a second. "Silver." Damien glared at him. "Are you serious?" "It's the first thing that came to mind. And she probably won't say it." Damien looked sick. "Fine." They entered the building. The hallway smelled of old carpet, damp coats, and cheap cleaning spray. They climbed 2 flights of stairs. Every step felt louder than the last. At the top, they walked down the corridor until they reached her door. Jason stepped out of view. Damien stood in front of the door, sweating, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. He knocked twice. A few seconds passed. The door opened. His ex-girlfriend stood there. She looked normal. That was the worst part. Her hair was neat. Her eyes were calm. The flat behind her was dim, lit by candles. The strange smell was still there, faint but present. "Can we talk?" Damien asked. She looked at him for a moment, then stepped aside. He entered. The door closed behind him. Jason moved closer in the hallway and pressed his ear toward the door. He could hear voices, muffled but clear enough. "I made a mistake," Damien said inside. "I'm sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. I can't live without you." Silence followed. Jason held his breath. Then her voice came, soft and comforting. "It's not your fault," she said. "You weren't thinking straight again." "I know," Damien said. "I'm trying. I want to be better." "You can be," she said. "I know you can. You just jump too quickly sometimes. You always have." "My little," she paused. Jason leaned closer. "My little silver bullet." Jason's eyes widened. That was the word. He knocked hard on the door. Inside the flat, she turned toward the sound. Damien stood still. He was not ready, not even close. Fear flooded his body. His hands were wet with sweat. His breathing became fast and broken. He looked toward the kitchen counter and saw a knife drawer. She walked slowly toward the door. Damien moved. He slipped into the kitchen, pulled open the drawer, and saw a bread knife. He grabbed a tissue from a box on the counter, wrapped it around the handle, and lifted the knife with shaking hands. She reached the door and unlocked it. Then she stopped. Her body became completely still. Slowly, she turned her head. Damien stood behind her with the knife in his hand. His mouth hung open. He could not speak. He could not move. She stared into his eyes. Then, her pupils began to change. They widened until they swallowed the color of her eyes. Then, the black shifted into red. A deep, burning red that spread across the whites of her eyes until both eyes glowed like hot coals. Her voice was calm. "You went for a new girl, didn't you?" Then she launched herself across the room. Damien screamed. She hit him with impossible force, knocking him to the floor. The knife flew from his hand and skidded across the room. She landed on his back, digging her fingers into him as he struggled underneath her. Jason threw himself against the door. "Let him go," he shouted. Inside, Damien kicked and twisted, trying to push her off. But she was too strong. She growled above him, low and wet, like an animal that had learned to speak. "You thought you could get away from me?" she hissed. You don't even know what I am." Her glowing eyes grew brighter. Damien squeezed his eyes shut, crying out in pain as the light burned through his eyelids. Then her body began to change. Her skin bubbled and cracked. Her chin stretched to a sharp point. Her face turned gray and broken, as if the human mask she had worn was tearing from the inside. Her mouth widened, and thick green saliva dripped from her teeth. The smell that came from her was unbearable, like rot, smoke, and something dead buried deep underground. Damien sobbed beneath her. She lowered her face toward his. Her teeth sharpened as she smiled. Jason slammed into the door again and again. The door had not been locked properly. On the next hit, it burst open. Jason rushed inside, grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall near the hallway, and threw it aside when he saw the open knife drawer. He ran to it, grabbed the first kitchen knife he could find, and drove it into her back. She screamed. The sound was so high and terrible that Jason dropped to one knee and covered one ear. The windows shook. A framed picture fell from the wall and shattered. Damien kicked hard and slipped free. He grabbed the bread knife from the floor and drove it into her stomach. Dark blood poured out over him, thick and hot. She screamed again, but now the sound broke apart. Her body began to shrivel. Her skin tightened over her bones. The red light in her eyes flickered. A dark blue glow formed around her. It started as a small pulse near her chest, then grew into a ball of light around her whole body. The air in the flat became heavy. The shelves shook. Plates fell and smashed. The floor trembled beneath them. Jason grabbed Damien by the arm. "We have to get out now." They ran. Out of the flat, down the corridor, down the stairs, through the hall, out into the street. Behind them, the blue glow spread through the building. It filled the windows. It crawled along the walls like fire made of cold light. A scream rose from inside, not just from her, but from something much larger and much older. Then the light burst. For 1 second, the whole building flashed blue. Then silence. The windows went dark. People began rushing out of the flats, shouting and crying. Someone called emergency services. Far away, sirens began to rise. Damien collapsed onto the pavement across the street. Jason sat beside him, breathing hard, covered in sweat and blood. Damien stared at the building without blinking. His face was empty. He had looked at something that should not exist. He had felt its breath on his skin. He had seen death wearing the face of the woman he once loved. When police cars and ambulances arrived, the street filled with red and blue lights. Officers moved toward the building with weapons raised. Paramedics hurried to the people outside. A male paramedic and a female paramedic came toward Damien and Jason first, because both of them were covered in blood. "Are you boys okay?" the male paramedic asked. "What happened here?" Jason looked at him, hollow-eyed. "I can't explain it," he said. "My mate isn't responding." The female paramedic knelt beside Damien. "Can you hear me?" she asked gently. "Are you hurt?" "Can I get you some water?" Damien did not answer. He felt dead inside. The woman reached for his arm. "Let's get him into the ambulance," she said. Her hand closed around Damien's wrist. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then smoke rose from her fingers. The female paramedic screamed. Damien looked down. Her skin began to burn where she touched him. It blistered, split, and blackened. She fell backward, clutching her hand as the fire spread up her arm beneath the skin. The male paramedic rushed to help her, but it was already too late. She screamed on the pavement as her body began to break down in the same horrible way. Jason backed away, his face draining of color. Damien stared at her. No emotion crossed his face. The demon was gone. The woman who cursed him was dead. But the curse had not been removed. Maybe she had known it would end this way. Maybe that had been her final revenge. Maybe she had never planned to free him at all. If she could not have him, no one would. Damien sat on the cold pavement as the paramedic melted in front of him, and he finally understood what his life had become. He could never touch another woman. He could never be comforted by one. He could never be loved by one. He could never be saved by one. His freedom had lasted only a few hours. Now his real prison had begun, and this time there were no bars, no locks, and no way out. Damien lowered his head and stared at his hands. They looked normal. That made it worse. Around him, people screamed. Sirens wailed. Police shouted orders. Jason called his name again and again. But Damien barely heard any of it. There was nothing left inside him now. Only a hollow body. Only a curse. Only the cold knowledge that he would spend the rest of his life alone. Story 2. The rail maintenance station stood far away from almost everything. It was built deep in the northern forest, about 70 kilometers above the regional line at Anix Junction. The old Soviet builders had placed it there because an elevated track crossed through a difficult stretch of low forest, marshland, and frozen ground. The track needed regular checks, especially in winter, when ice could gather on the supports and make the line dangerous for passing trains. There was no real town nearby. The closest permanent settlement was a small village about 22 kilometers south by Service Road. Only around 40 people lived there, and most of them were old. In good weather, the road between the village and the station could be crossed by truck, but in snow or heavy rain, it became slow and miserable. At night, with the trees pressing close on both sides, it felt much longer than 22 kilometers. The station was known as Karsk 12. It had one concrete maintenance building, sleeping quarters, a small kitchen, a radio room, a fuel shed, and an outside platform where tools and spare rail parts were stored. The power still worked, but not always well. The lights sometimes flickered. Sometimes they failed completely. Because of that, kerosene lamps were kept all over the station. At least, that was the official reason. 2 men were working there when the incident happened. The senior man was Markov, 54 years old. He had worked that northern section for about 11 years. People in the rail office described him as quiet, careful, and difficult to replace. He knew the track, the weather, the forest, and every strange problem that came with that station. He was not friendly, but he was reliable. And in a place like Karsk 12, that mattered more than anything. The second man was Sidorov, 26 years old. He had arrived only 6 weeks earlier as a replacement trainee. Secondary operators did not usually stay at northern stations forever. They came from a district pool and worked rotating 6-week contracts. At the end of a rotation, a supply driver came to pick them up and bring in the next man. Sidorov was supposed to leave on the morning of November 15th. When the driver arrived that morning, nobody came out to meet him. The station door was closed. Smoke was no longer rising from the kitchen vent. The outside platform was half covered in new snow. The driver honked twice, waited, then stepped out of the truck and called their names. No one answered. He found what was left of Markov about 80 meters east of the station, beside the tracks. Sidorov was found later, or rather, pieces of what proved he had been there. Fragments of clothing and personal belongings were recovered near the forest edge north of the maintenance shed. The regional doctor wrote both deaths down as fatal animal attacks. No specific animal was named in the report. A hunting team from the district office searched the forest for 2 days. They found tracks, though snowfall had partly filled them in. The tracks led north toward the marshland and then disappeared into ice, mud, and water. No animal was found. No carcass, no blood except the blood of the 2 men. No proof that anything had been wounded. The rail administration stopped traffic through that section for 2 days. Then the line was reopened at reduced night speeds. That was how the official matter ended. I became involved afterward. I was hired by a firm under contract with the regional rail administration. My job was simple. I had to clear the station, inventory everything inside, remove personal belongings, prepare the site for reassignment, and make sure the next workers could move in without dealing with what had happened before. By the time I arrived, the visible remains had already been removed. The track section had been washed down. The regional doctor, rail inspectors, and hunting team had all been through the building. The worst of it was gone, at least physically. But the station still felt wrong. It was the kind of wrong that does not appear in reports. The kind that sits in the air and waits for you to notice it. The first thing I noticed was the lamps. There were too many of them. 6 kerosene lamps were in the sleeping quarters alone. 2 stood beside the exterior door. 1 hung in the maintenance corridor. 3 more were stored in the tool shed. Every lamp had been recently cleaned and filled, not simply checked. Cleaned, prepared, ready to be used at a moment's notice. Under the kitchen table, I found extra fuel reserves stacked in heavy containers. It was far more fuel than 2 men should have needed for normal operations. Enough to keep lamps burning for days. Then, I noticed the rifles. 3 hunting rifles were assigned to the station, even though only 2 workers were posted there. 1 rifle had been left beside Markov's bed. Another had been found outside near the eastern service path, close to where inspectors had marked the location of his body. The third had been recovered near the forest's edge. All 3 rifles had been recently maintained. 2 had been fired. When I asked the regional supervisor whether dangerous wildlife was common in the area, he told me the northern maintenance sections had long-standing winter guidelines about wolves. He said it the way a man repeats something he has been told to say many times, but no longer fully believes. The guidelines were posted inside a cabinet in the maintenance room, tucked beneath weekly inspection forms. The paper was old and yellow. The date on it was 1986. The signatures at the bottom had faded so badly, they were almost gone. The rules were simple. Never work outside alone after sunset. Always keep at least 1 lamp lit during exterior work. Always stay within sight of the other worker. Firearms must remain loaded and be carried during night operations. If lighting fails outside, return to the station immediately. If 1 worker disappears from sight, use the emergency line inside the station and do not search alone. On paper, the rules sounded like a response to wolves. But the more I read through the station records, the less I believed that. Markov and Sadorov had kept an operational notebook, as all station workers were required to do. Most entries in such notebooks are boring. Weather, track conditions, supply requests, equipment checks. Karsk 12 had those too, but hidden between them was something else. The first entry that mattered was from October 3rd, written by Markov. He wrote that Sidorov arrived by supply truck shortly before dusk. Markov described him as younger than expected, thin, and clearly from the city. He said the young man had brought too many books and not enough winter clothes. Sidorov asked whether the wolves were really as bad as people said. Markov told him that wolves were manageable if the procedures were followed. He showed him the station, the tool inventory, the fuel records, and the maintenance schedule. He also showed him the night protocols. Sidorov asked why the protocols were so strict if the wolves were manageable. Markov wrote that he told him manageable was not the same as safe. The floodlights were for the trains. The lamps and rifles were for them. Sidorov laughed at that. Markov's final line in the entry was strange. He wrote that Vasya at Studiony Bor used to hiss at the forest before snowfall. Then he wrote, "There is no cat here." I find that I miss the certainty of that. I did not understand what he meant. Not then. A few days later, Sidorov wrote his own entry. He complained that Markov insisted on carrying lamps even for short walks between buildings after dark. He said the floodlights around the station were brighter than the streets back home, and that Markov's behavior seemed excessive. Markov checked lamp fuel every evening before bed. He checked the rifle actions twice. He even woke Sidorov once because the western exterior door had been left unlatched. Sidorov asked whether something had happened there before he arrived. Markov said yes. When Sidorov asked what had happened, Markov told him, "The measures exist because something happened everywhere before we arrived." Sidorov wrote that he did not know whether the older man had been joking. On October 11th, Markov wrote that the tracks had iced over after midnight. He and Sidorov cleared the buildup from switch section B in heavy wind and poor visibility. Sidorov tried to carry only one lamp between them so he could free his other hand for tools. Markov corrected him. Then, Markov wrote one sentence that made me stop reading for a moment. He still does not understand that the lamps are not for seeing. That sentence stayed with me. It was not something a man writes about wolves. On October 15th, Sidorov wrote that something had been outside the sleeping quarters around 2 in the morning. He heard movement near the fuel drums and what sounded like breathing. Markov woke immediately, but he did not look through the window. Instead, he turned on both interior lamps and told Sidorov to stay away from the glass. They waited in silence for about 20 minutes. In the morning, they found tracks in the snow beyond the shed. Sidorov wrote that they were large, probably wolf tracks, as Markov said. But he added that he had never heard wolves circle a building without making noise. Markov burned the tracks away with kerosene before breakfast. That was another detail I could not ignore. If the tracks were only from wolves, why burn them? On October 22nd, Sidorov asked Markov what had happened to the previous operator. Markov said the man had retired. Sidorov asked why the retirement had happened in the middle of a contract. Markov said he became careless. Sidorov asked what that meant. Markov answered, "It means he is alive." That entry was written in Sidorov's neat handwriting, but I could almost hear the silence that must have followed those words. Sidorov also asked how long Markov had been stationed at Karsk 12. Markov told him 11 years. When Sidorov asked why he had never rotated out, Markov said, "Someone has to remember." By then, I had begun to understand the station better. Karsk 12 was not simply a difficult post. It was a place where knowledge had been passed from worker to worker for decades. Not through official training, not through modern safety videos or neat printed manuals. Through fear, through habits, through old men telling young men to carry lamps, keep rifles loaded, and never stand near the glass after midnight. On October 28th, Markov noted that the western floodlight went out during a routine inspection at 2310. There was no breaker fault. The light returned 4 minutes later by itself. Sidorov asked if it had happened before. Markov said yes. Sidorov asked why. Markov said he did not know. Sidorov asked whether the line should be shut down when that happened. Markov said trains still needed to move. That answer bothered me more than the failure itself. It suggested that whatever happened out there had happened before, and not rarely enough to surprise him. It also suggested that everyone higher up had chosen to keep the trains moving anyway. On November 1st, Sidorov wrote that he was beginning to understand why Markov disliked the forest after dark. They were replacing a damaged coupling on the northern maintenance trolley shortly after sunset when Sidorov heard movement beyond the tree line. He raised the lamp toward it, and whatever was there moved back immediately. Fast, too fast. Markov saw it too. He stopped talking in the middle of a sentence and chambered around into his rifle. The two men finished the repair in silence and returned directly to the station. Afterward, Markov locked all 3 exterior doors, something he normally did only during storms. The next day, Markov wrote that Sidorov had finally asked the correct question. Not what was out there. Why did it avoid the light? Markov wrote that he told the young man he did not know. Sidorov then asked whether Markov had ever seen one clearly. Markov answered no. But in the notebook, he added, "This was not entirely true. I read that line several times." He had seen something. Maybe not clearly. Maybe not long enough to name, but enough that he knew the difference between a wolf and whatever the station rules were really about. On November 5th, Sidorov wrote about a dream. He dreamed someone was knocking on the maintenance door, asking to be let inside. When he told Markov, the older man said that if anyone knocked after midnight, they were not to answer unless they could see the lamp that person was carrying. Sidorov asked what would happen if the person was not carrying a lamp. Markov replied, then they should not have been outside. By November 8th, the weather had turned severe. The snow had come early and stayed. Markov wrote that they completed an inspection of the eastern supports before dusk. Sidorov had suggested skipping the second lamp because of the distance and weather. Markov refused. Later, Sidorov apologized, though Markov noted that the apology had less conviction than before. Nothing had been seen near the tree line since the first of the month. Markov wrote that the boy had decided the worst had passed. Then he added, "I have not corrected him." On November 11th, the station lost power around 1:40 in the morning. The full blackout lasted less than a minute before backup power returned. During that short darkness, Sidorov heard something move across the roof above the sleeping quarters. Markov had the lamps lit before the generators finished restarting. Neither man slept afterward. The final complete notebook entry from Markov was written on November 13th. Ice had collected on the eastern line support, and it needed to be cleared before night temperatures worsened. Markov wrote that they should have done it that afternoon, but visibility had been poor, and Sidorov had developed a cough from the cold. They planned to finish the work before evening meal the next day. At the end of the entry, Markov wrote 3 short lines. checked rifles, checked lamps, checked rifles again. A field maintenance sheet was recovered from the Eastern Support after the incident. Most of the writing belonged to Markov. It said they left the station at 12:20 on November 14th for Eastern Support inspection and ice clearing. The weather was overcast, but manageable. They brought both rifles, standard tools, and 2 lamps. One lamp was dropped while crossing the lower embankment. The glass broke, and the fuel was lost. The work took longer than expected because the support was in worse condition than they thought. The remaining lamp was still functioning at 1740. Sidorov believed they could finish before full dark. Markov told him they should return and finish tomorrow. Sidorov argued that they were nearly done. Markov wrote, 10 minutes more. Then we go back together. The next line said, I am going up. Sidorov will hold the light. Below that, the handwriting changed. It was Sidorov's. Lamp going weak. Almost finished. He worries too much. Going to shed for the reserve canister. Back in 10 minutes. Those were the last words written by either man. When I stood outside the Eastern Support with that paper in my hand, I tried to imagine the moment. The sky darkening. Snow beginning to fall. One broken lamp already useless on the ground. The second lamp fading. Markov up on the support, trying to finish the work. Sidorov below, coughing in the cold, tired of being afraid, tired of Markov's rules, tired of carrying lamps. The reserve fuel was not far. He must have thought he could make it there and back quickly. 10 minutes. That was all. But the rules had been clear since 1986. Never work alone after sunset. Always stay within visual distance. If lighting fails, return to the station immediately. If one worker goes missing, use the emergency line. Do not search alone. Sidorov left the light. Maybe he took the rifle. Maybe he thought he had enough time. Maybe he thought Markov's fear had made him foolish. Maybe he heard something call from the shed. The inspectors believed Markov came down from the support after Sidorov failed to return. The second rifle was found near the service path. That meant Markov either went looking for him or tried to retreat and was caught before reaching the station. The third rifle, found near the forest edge, had likely been with Sidorov. 2 rifles had been fired. No blood except theirs was found. No animal was found. No body of whatever attacked them was found. While clearing the station, I worked mostly during daylight. Even then, I kept the doors open only when necessary. The place made me uneasy. It was not the visible damage. There was very little left to see. It was the preparation, the lamps, the fuel, the loaded rifles, the old rules that had been kept in a cabinet for almost 30 years. On my second evening there, the power flickered shortly after sunset. It lasted only a second. The overhead light in the kitchen blinked off and on, and for that 1 second I heard something outside the western door. A soft scrape, then breathing. I stood completely still. The sound was close, just beyond the door. Not a growl, not a snarl, not anything I could comfortably call an animal. It was slow and patient, like something waiting for me to make a decision. I did what Markov had done. I lit 2 lamps. Then I stayed away from the glass. The sound stopped after a while, but I did not sleep that night. In the morning, there were marks in the snow near the fuel drums. I did not try to identify them. I did not photograph them. I did not report them. I poured kerosene over them and burned them away. On the 3rd day, I completed the inventory. Clothing and personal effects were kept for the surviving families. Furniture and tools remained with the station for continued state use. Kitchen perishables were thrown out. Firearms were returned to the Regional Rail Administration. The lamps remained with the property. One damaged lamp from the Eastern Line had broken glass and signs of partial fuel loss. Another lamp recovered near the same site was intact, but empty. The maintenance guidelines stayed in the operations cabinet because the administration instructed me to leave them there. Before I left, I checked the exterior floodlights above the track section. They were fully operational. That should have made me feel better. It did not. The rail administration resumed full night operations through Karsk 12 within the month. A replacement secondary operator was assigned in January of the following year. The senior posting took longer to fill. It was advertised twice before someone accepted it. I do not know what that new man was told. Maybe they told him about wolves. Maybe they told him to follow procedures. Maybe they gave him the same old cabinet key and expected him to find the yellow paper himself. But I hope, for his sake, he understood the most important part before his first night at Karsk 12. The floodlights are for the trains. The lamps are for whatever waits at the edge of the forest. And they are not for seeing. Story 3. Hi, my name is Billy. I am 7 years old now. I live in an old farmhouse with my mommy and daddy. The house is far away from town, with a long dirt road in front and a wide cornfield behind it. In the daytime, the farm looks nice. The sky is big and blue, and the wind makes the corn move like waves in the ocean. Sometimes, birds sit on the fence, and sometimes deer come close to the edge of the trees. But at night, the farm does not feel nice. At night, the cornfield turns black. The stalks scrape against each other when the wind blows, and it sounds like whispering. The trees beyond the field look tall and thin, like they are watching the house. The windows turn dark, and when I look outside, I sometimes feel like something is looking back at me. I do not like the cornfield. I have not liked it for a long time. 5 years ago, it took my sister. Her name was Anna. She was 6 years old when it happened. I was only 2 then, so some people say I was too little to remember things. Mommy and Daddy always tell me that. They say I was just a baby. They say I probably mixed up dreams with real life. But I remember. I remember Anna's yellow dress. I remember how she used to hold my hand when we played in the yard. I remember how she would bend down and show me bugs in the grass, even though I did not understand what she was saying. I remember her laugh. It was loud and happy, and it made Mommy smile when she heard it. And I remember the man who took her. Mommy and Daddy say Anna wandered off. They say she must have walked into the cornfield while they were not looking. They say children can get lost very easily. They say the field is big, and the woods are even bigger. They say maybe she got confused. Maybe she got scared. Maybe she fell somewhere. Or maybe an animal got her. But that is not what happened. I saw him. He was very tall. Taller than Daddy. Taller than anyone I had ever seen. His arms were long, and his legs looked too thin for his body. He wore dark clothes, even though it was a sunny day. I remember his face, but not very well. It is like my mind does not want to look at it all the way. When I try to remember it, I see pale skin, a wide mouth, and eyes that did not blink much. He came from the cornfield. Anna was standing near the edge of the yard. I was sitting on the grass with my toy truck. I remember the wheels were red, and one of them did not turn right. Anna was talking to me, making up a story about the truck being a fire engine. Then she stopped talking. I looked up and saw the tall man standing behind her. He smiled at her. He did not smile like Mommy or Daddy. His smile was too big, and it did not make his eyes look happy. He said he only wanted to talk to her. That is what I remember most. He said it softly, like he was being kind. Anna looked scared. She stepped back a little, but he reached out and took her hand. He did not grab her hard at first. He just held her wrists like he was an adult helping a child cross the street. Then Anna tried to pull away. That was when he held her tighter. She looked at me. I still remember her face. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. Then she said my name. Billy. The tall man looked at me then. His eyes were dark. He lifted one finger to his mouth, like he wanted me to be quiet. Then he pulled Anna into the cornfield. The stalks closed around them, and I never saw my sister alive again. I cried and cried. Mommy came running out of the house and picked me up. Daddy ran into the cornfield, shouting Anna's name. More people came later. Police cars came. Neighbors came. Dogs came. Everyone walked through the corn and the woods and called for Anna. But they did not find her. For days, people searched. They put up pictures of her. Mommy cried all the time. Daddy stopped talking much. I tried to tell him about the tall man, but I was too little. I did not know all the words yet. I kept pointing at the cornfield and saying, "Man, Anna, man." They thought I was confused. When I got older and started drawing pictures, I tried again. I took my crayons and drew the tall man. I made him very long, with black clothes and big hands. I drew Anna in her yellow dress beside him. I drew the cornfield behind them. I showed Mommy and Daddy. Mommy looked at the picture and started crying. Daddy took it from her and folded it up. He said, "Billy, that is enough." I told him the man was real. Daddy said, "You were 2 years old. You do not remember." But I did remember. I remembered everything. After that, I stopped talking about the tall man. Every time I mentioned him, Mommy's face turned white, and Daddy got angry. So I learned to keep it inside. I learned to sleep with my blanket pulled up to my chin. I learned not to look out my window at night, but I still felt him sometimes. I felt him near the cornfield. I felt him in the dark spaces between the stalks. Sometimes, when I played outside, I would see the corn move even when there was no wind. Sometimes I heard a small sound that was not a bird or an animal. It sounded like someone whispering my name from far away. "Billy, Billy, Billy." I always ran back inside when that happened. Mommy and Daddy said I had a big imagination. I did not. A couple nights ago, the tall man came back. I was in my bedroom trying to sleep. My room is on the second floor, but the roof outside my window is low, and the branches of the old tree scrape close to the glass when the wind blows. My nightlight was on. It is shaped like the moon, and it makes the walls glow soft blue. I was not asleep yet. I was thinking about Anna. I do that sometimes. I try to remember her voice so I do not forget it. Then I heard a knock. Not on the door, on the window. Tap, tap, tap. I froze under my blanket. At first, I thought it was a tree branch, but then it came again. Tap, 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 slow, careful, like someone using one finger. I turned my head very slowly. The tall man was outside my window. His face was close to the glass. I wanted to scream, but my voice disappeared. My whole body went cold. I could see him clearly in the moonlight. He was crouched on the roof outside. Even though he was so tall, he should not have been able to fit there. His knees were bent in a strange way. His long hands rested against the window frame. He smiled at me. Then he lifted one hand and pointed at the latch. He wanted me to open the window. I shook my head. His smile got wider. He pointed again. I pulled my blanket up to my mouth and shook my head harder. Tears were running down my face, but I did not make a sound. I was afraid that if I screamed, Mommy and Daddy would not come. I was afraid that if I moved, he would break the glass and climb inside. The tall man waited. He tapped again, softer this time. Tap, tap, tap. Then he leaned closer until his forehead touched the window. His breath fogged the glass. He opened his mouth, and I heard his voice through the window. Billy, it sounded like dry leaves rubbing together. I squeezed my eyes shut. I stayed like that for a long time. When I finally looked again, he was gone. The next morning, I told Mommy and Daddy. They were sitting at the kitchen table. Mommy was drinking coffee, and Daddy was reading something on his phone. The sun was shining through the curtains. Everything looked normal, but I did not feel normal. I told them the tall man had been at my window. Mommy looked at Daddy. Daddy sighed. Billy, he said, "We have talked about this." I saw him, I said. He wanted me to open the window. Mommy rubbed her eyes. Honey, it was probably a dream. It was not a dream. Daddy put his phone down. You need to stop making up stories about that man. I started crying then. I did not want to, but I could not help it. I am not making it up, I said. He took Anna. Mommy stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. She walked out of the kitchen without looking at me. Daddy stared at me for a long time. Then he said, "Go play outside." I did not want to go outside, but Daddy's voice was the kind that meant I should do what he said. So I went. I played in the backyard with my toy cars. I stayed close to the porch. I kept looking at the cornfield. The stalks moved in the wind, whispering and bending. The sun was bright, but the space between the rows still looked dark. I tried to tell myself he only came at night. Then I heard the corn rustle. I looked up. The tall man was walking toward me. He came out of the field like he had been waiting there the whole time. His long legs moved slowly through the grass. His arms hung at his sides. His head was tilted a little, like he was listening to something only he could hear. I screamed before he even touched me. He moved faster than I thought he could. His hand wrapped around my arm. His fingers were cold and strong. They went all the way around my wrist. I screamed again and kicked at him. "Mommy, Daddy." The tall man looked toward the house. For the first time, his smile went away. The back door opened and my parents came running out. As soon as the man saw them, he let go of me and ran back into the cornfield. He moved too fast. He slipped between the stalks and the field swallowed him. Mommy reached me first and grabbed my shoulders. "What happened?" she asked. "The man." I cried. The tall man grabbed me. Daddy looked toward the field. There was nothing there. No man, no footprints that I could see. Only the corn moving in the wind. Daddy's face changed. He looked angry, but not at the field. At me. "Billy," he said, "this is not funny. It is true." Mommy checked my arm. There were red marks where the tall man had grabbed me. I pointed to them, but Mommy said I must have scraped myself on the fence. I told them I had not gone near the fence. They did not listen. They brought me inside and told me to stop making up scary things. Mommy said I had been thinking about Anna too much. Daddy said if I kept lying, I would be sent to my room for the rest of the day. But I was not lying. Later that day, They let me go outside again. I did not understand why. I begged to stay inside, but Daddy said the fresh air would help me stop being so dramatic. Mommy said she would watch from the kitchen window. So I went into the backyard again. This time, I stayed right by the steps. I did not play with my cars. I just sat there and looked at the cornfield. The sun was lower now, and the shadows were long. The whole yard had turned orange and dark. Then the corn moved. I stood up. The tall man came out again. I screamed right away. Mommy. Daddy. He grabbed me before I could reach the door. His hand clamped over my mouth. His other arm wrapped around my chest. I kicked and tried to bite him, but he was too strong. I looked toward the kitchen window. Mommy was not there. No one came. I screamed into his hand until my throat hurt, but the sound was trapped. The tall man pulled me backward across the yard. My shoes dragged through the dirt. I reached for the porch railing, but my fingers slipped off. Then he took me into the cornfield. The stalks closed around us. Everything became darker. The corn was taller than me, taller than Daddy. It blocked the house from view almost right away. I could still hear my own crying. I could hear the tall man breathing. I could hear the leaves scraping against my face and arms. He dragged me deeper and deeper. I tried to remember which way the house was, but the rows all looked the same. The ground was uneven, and I tripped more than once. He did not stop. He pulled me up and kept going. After a while, we came out of the cornfield, but we were not near the road. We were at the edge of the forest. The trees stood close together, dark and thick. I had never gone into the woods alone. Mommy used to tell me there were foxes and snakes there. Daddy said old wells and holes were hidden under the leaves, but the tall man took me in without slowing down. The forest smelled wet and old. Branches scratched my arms. Leaves crunched under my feet. I cried quietly now because I was too tired to scream. Finally, we reached a cabin. It was small and crooked, with dirty windows and a roof covered in leaves. It looked like no one had lived there for a long time, but there was light inside. Yellow light, weak and shaking, like candles. The tall man opened the door. The smell hit me first. It was awful. It smelled like old meat, dust, and something sweet that had gone bad. I gagged, and the tall man pushed me inside. The cabin had one main room. The walls were made of dark wood. There were no pictures, no nice furniture, no toys. Just a table, some old shelves, and a chair in the middle of the room. Someone was sitting in the chair. At first, I thought it was a doll. Then I saw the yellow dress. My sister. Anna. She was sitting in the chair with her head tilted to one side. Her skin looked gray and dry. Her hair was thin and tangled. Her hands rested in her lap. She was not moving. She was not breathing. I knew she was dead. Even though I was little, I knew. The room started spinning. I tried to run to her, but the tall man held my shoulder. Then I saw Mommy and Daddy. Only they were not Mommy and Daddy anymore. They were standing beside Anna's body, one on each side of the chair. They were smiling, not small smiles, not happy smiles. Big smiles. Their mouths stretched from ear to ear, wider than any person's mouth should stretch. Their teeth showed. Their eyes were open too wide. They looked like people wearing masks of my parents' faces. I stopped crying. I was too scared to cry. Mommy? I whispered. The thing that looked like Mommy laughed. Oh, Billy, she said. Still calling me that? Daddy's smile grew wider. I stepped back, but the tall man's hand stayed on my shoulder. The thing that looked like Daddy bent down a little, like he was talking to a much younger child. We are not your real parents. I did not understand at first. My real parents were standing in front of me. They had tucked me into bed. They had made me breakfast. They had hugged me when I was scared. They had told me stories and taken me to school and bought me toys. But as I looked at their smiles, I knew something was wrong with them. Something had always been wrong. The thing that looked like Mommy stroked Anna's dead hair. Your real Mommy and Daddy died a long time ago, she said, before your sister was taken. No, I whispered. Yes, Daddy said. We killed them. My legs felt weak. The room was too hot. The smell was too strong. I looked at Anna again, sitting there in the chair, and I felt like I was going to fall. The fake Mommy smiled at me. We raised you after that. We watched you grow. We waited. Why? I asked. My voice sounded tiny. The tall man behind me made a low sound that might have been a laugh. Fake Daddy stepped closer. Because fear tastes better when it grows slowly. I did not understand what that meant, but I understood enough to be scared. Fake Mommy leaned close to my face. Her breath smelled rotten. Your sister squirmed too much, she said softly. We hope you do not squirm as much as she did. That was when something happened inside me. I do not know how to explain it. I was scared, more scared than I had ever been in my life. But under the fear, something hot and strong suddenly burst in my chest. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was Anna helping me. Maybe it was just the part of me that wanted to live. I screamed as loud as I could and pushed backward with all my strength. The tall man did not expect it. He stumbled. His hand slipped from my shoulder. I ran. Fake Mommy screamed behind me, but her voice did not sound like Mommy anymore. It sounded high and sharp, like an animal. The tall man crashed into the wall as he tried to catch me. Fake Daddy shouted my name, but I did not stop. I ran out of the cabin and into the woods. Branches slapped my face. Thorns scratched my legs. My shoes slipped on wet leaves. Behind me, I heard them all chasing me. The tall man's footsteps were long and heavy. The fake parents moved faster than people should move. They called my name again and again. Billy, come back, Billy. Do not make this harder. I did not look behind me. I ran through the forest until my lungs burned. I ran until I reached the cornfield. The stalks stood in front of me like a wall, but I pushed into them. Leaves cut my cheeks. Dirt filled my shoes. I fell once and almost did not get up. Then I heard Anna's voice, not out loud, inside my head. Run, so I ran. The cornfield went on forever. I did not know where I was. I did not know if I was running toward the house or away from it. I only knew that the things behind me were getting closer. Then I saw light, car headlights. I burst out of the cornfield and onto the road. A car slammed on its brakes. The horn screamed. I fell in front of it, crying and shaking. A man jumped out of the driver's seat. Kid, are you okay? I crawled toward him and grabbed his jacket. Please, I cried. Do not let them take me. He looked past me at the cornfield. I looked too. For 1 second, I saw 3 shapes standing between the stalks. The tall man, fake Mommy, fake Daddy. They stood still, watching us. Then the car's headlights flickered. When the lights came back steady, the shapes were gone. The man put me in his car. He locked the doors. I was crying so hard I could barely talk, but I tried to tell him everything. I told him about Anna. I told him about the cabin. I told him my parents were not my parents. He did not tell me I was lying. He did not tell me I had a big imagination. He drove me straight to the police station. At the station, I told the story again. A woman officer gave me a blanket and hot chocolate. Another officer asked me questions. I was scared they would not believe me, but they listened. Maybe because I had scratches all over my arms. Maybe because I was shaking so badly. Maybe because the man from the car said he had seen something in the cornfield too, though he could not explain what. The police went to the farmhouse first. My parents were gone. The house was empty. Not empty like they had gone shopping. Empty like no one had lived there in years. The pictures were gone from the walls. The clothes were gone from the closets. My room was still there, but some of my things were missing. The kitchen table was dusty. The refrigerator was unplugged and smelled bad. Then the police searched the woods. They found the cabin. But they did not find the tall man. They did not find my fake parents. They did not find Anna's body. The chair was gone too. Inside the cabin, there were marks on the floor where the chair had been. There were scratches on the door. There was old dirt, old rope, and strange stains the police would not let me see. But everything important was missing. It was like they had known the police were coming. Now I am staying somewhere safe. At least, that is what the grown-ups say. People keep talking about where I should live next. They use words I do not understand. Foster care, relatives, investigation, trauma. They ask me if I remember any other family. I do not. I ask them if they found my real mommy and daddy. They do not answer. At night, I sleep with the light on. I keep the curtains closed. I do not like windows anymore. I do not like cornfields. I do not like tall shadows in the corner of the room. The police say they are still looking, but I do not think they will find them. Because I think the tall man and the fake parents can go wherever they want. I think they can wear faces that do not belong to them. I think they can live in houses and smile at children and pretend for years if they need to. Sometimes I wonder how many other kids are out there right now, sitting at breakfast with people they call mommy and daddy, never knowing those are not their parents at all. Sometimes I wonder if Anna was the only one before me. Sometimes I hear tapping on the window. The adults say it is just branches. But there are no trees outside this window. And last night, right before I pulled the blanket over my head, I heard a voice outside whisper my name. Billy, Billy, Billy. It sounded just like the tall man. And this time, when I looked at the glass, there was a smile in the dark. Story 4. I currently live on the north coast of Scotland, in a place where the land feels old, lonely, and full of stories that people do not always talk about. The coast here is beautiful, but it also has a strange kind of heaviness to it, especially at night. During the day, you can look out over the sea and see the cliffs, the rocks, the waves, and the open sky, and it feels peaceful. But after dark, when the wind comes in from the water and the town lights begin to fade behind you, the same coastline can feel completely different. It can feel as if the land is watching you. Last Monday, around 11 p.m., I decided to go exploring. It was probably not the smartest idea. I know that now, and even at the time. Part of me knew it was not the kind of thing most people would do alone at night. But I have always been drawn to old places. Ruins, tunnels, forts, bunkers, abandoned buildings, anything that has been left behind by history always seems to pull me in. I like places where the past still feels close. I like standing inside them and imagining what might have happened there before the world moved on. There's an old World War II bunker on the coast, somewhere between the town of Thurso and Scrabster Harbor. It is not huge or dramatic from the outside. It is not some giant underground military base with tunnels stretching for miles. It is more like a small pillbox, a simple concrete and brick structure built for wartime defense. Still, there is something about it. It sits above the coast, exposed to the wind and the sea, looking out over the water like it has been waiting there for decades. I had explored it once before when I first moved to the area. That first visit had been during the day, and while the place had felt old and lonely, it had not really scared me. I took a few pictures, looked around, and left without thinking too much about it afterward. But for some reason, I kept thinking about going back at night. I wanted to see how different it would feel in the dark. I wanted to know if the place would feel the same, or if the night would change it. So around 11 p.m., I left town and started walking west along the cliff path. At first, it was not too bad. There was still enough light from the sky and from the distant town behind me to see where I was going. The air was cold, and the wind was moving across the grass in soft bursts. The sea was somewhere below, mostly hidden by the darkness, but I could hear it. The sound of waves hitting rocks followed me as I walked. It was not loud all the time, but it was always there, rising and falling in the background. The further I walked, the quieter everything became. Behind me, the lights of Thurso seemed smaller. Ahead of me, the path became darker and more open. There were no houses close by, no people walking, no cars passing, no voices. It was just me, the cliff path, the wind, and the sea. I kept telling myself that I was fine. I had been there before. I knew where I was going. There was nothing dangerous about an old bunker if you were careful. But nighttime has a way of making even familiar places feel unfamiliar. Eventually, I left the higher path and made my way down toward a pebble beach. The stones shifted under my feet as I walked, making small, crunching sounds that seemed much louder than they should have. I could see the darker shape of the sea to one side and the black outline of the land rising ahead of me. I continued for a few more minutes along the beach until I reached a promontory, a raised piece of land that pushed out toward the water. The bunker was at the very top of it. To reach it, I had to find the thin trail that led upward. In the dark, the path looked more like a break in the grass than a proper trail. It was narrow and uneven, and I had to move carefully so I would not slip. The ground was damp in places, and the wind grew stronger as I climbed higher. Every now and then, I stopped and looked back toward the beach below. The town lights were farther away now, and the whole area around me felt empty. When I finally reached the top, I saw the bunker. It was a small, cube-shaped brick structure standing alone against the night. It looked plain and rough, like a box made to survive the weather. There was a doorway, but no door. Just a dark, open entrance leading into the black inside. In daylight, that doorway probably would not have bothered me at all. But at night, it looked different. It looked like an open mouth. Before going inside, I took some pictures of the outside. I moved around it slowly, trying to capture the shape of it, the brickwork, the way it stood against the coast, and the darkness beyond it. The flash from my camera lit up sections of the walls for only a second at a time. Each flash made the bunker appear suddenly, sharply, and then disappear back into shadow. The effect was unsettling, though I could not explain why. After taking a few photos, I stepped through the doorway. Inside, the room was small, about the size of a shed. The walls were weathered and painted white, though the paint had faded and worn away in places. It had that cold, damp smell old concrete buildings often have, mixed with the salty air from the sea. There were tiny gaps or slits for windows on the sides, the kind of openings made for watching or aiming out from inside. Through them, I could see pieces of the darkness outside. Little cuts of black night on each side of the room. There was also a knee-high concrete counter running from one end of the room to the other. It was covered in graffiti, the kind left by people who had visited over the years. Names, marks, random words, and rough drawings had been scratched or painted onto the surface. Some of it looked old. Some of it looked recent. It reminded me that other people had been there before me. Probably teenagers, explorers, walkers, maybe tourists. That should have made the place feel less lonely. It did not. At first, I just stood there and let my eyes adjust. I moved around the small room slowly, looking at the walls, the window gaps, the counter, and the corners. I took more pictures, using the flash again. Each time the light went off, the room became white for a moment, then fell back into darkness. The tiny window slits let in almost no light, and the doorway behind me was the main opening to the outside. For the first few minutes, I felt fine. Not completely relaxed, because I was still alone in an old bunker on a dark coastal promontory at 11 p.m., but fine enough. I had expected the place to feel creepy, and I told myself that whatever I was feeling was only because of the setting. It was dark. It was isolated. The wind outside made strange sounds as it moved around the walls. The sea was below me, hidden but loud enough to remind me how far I was from the town. Then I noticed something strange. Whenever I moved near the doorway, or whenever I stood with my back turned directly toward it, I began to feel uneasy. At first, I thought it was normal fear. Nobody likes standing with their back to an open doorway in a dark, empty place. It is a natural feeling. You imagine someone standing behind you. You imagine movement where there is none. You become aware of how exposed you are. So I ignored it and kept looking around. But the feeling was too specific. When I moved to another corner of the room, away from the doorway, the uneasiness faded. I could stand near the wall, look out through the narrow window gap, take pictures, and feel almost normal again. But as soon as I moved back toward the doorway, the feeling returned. If I stood in front of it, I felt uncomfortable. If I turned my back to it, the feeling became stronger. It was as if that one part of the room had a different atmosphere from the rest. The space around the doorway felt wrong. I do not know how else to describe it. It was not like hearing a noise or seeing a shadow. I did not see anything standing there. I did not hear footsteps outside. Nothing touched me. Nothing moved in the corner of my eye. But the doorway had a presence to it, almost like an aura. It felt heavy. It felt watched. It felt as if something invisible was gathered there, just inside or just outside the entrance. I tried to reason with myself. I told myself it was only because the doorway was the only way in or out. I told myself my brain was reacting to the darkness outside. I told myself that any person standing alone in a bunker at night would feel strange with their back to an open doorway. But even as I told myself those things, the feeling did not go away. It seemed to grow stronger the longer I stayed there. The rest of the room did not feel the same. That was what bothered me most. If the whole bunker had felt uncomfortable, I could have blamed it on the location, the time, or my imagination. But it was only that area, the doorway, the entrance, the threshold between the bunker and the night outside. Every time I passed through that area, my body reacted before my mind could explain it. My shoulders tightened. My stomach dropped. I felt a strong need to move away from it. For a while, I kept taking pictures anyway. I did not want to leave just because of a feeling. Part of me felt foolish for being scared of an empty doorway. I had come all the way out there to explore the bunker at night, and I did not want to turn around after only a few minutes. So I continued studying the small space. I looked at the graffiti on the counter. I looked through the tiny window openings. I tried to imagine soldiers standing there during the war, watching the coast, waiting for danger that may or may not come. But the feeling near the doorway remained. Eventually, I decided I had taken enough pictures. I stepped back toward the entrance, and the uneasiness returned one last time, stronger than before. I paused just inside the doorway. For a second, I had the strange thought that something was standing close to me, not visible, but close enough that I could feel it. It was not a clear thought. It was more like instinct, like my body was telling me to leave before my mind had fully understood why. So I left. I stepped out of the bunker and back into the night air. The wind hit me immediately, and for a moment I felt better. The space outside was open, and the small room behind me no longer pressed in around me. I turned once and looked back at the doorway. It was just a dark opening in a small brick structure. Nothing came out. Nothing moved inside. There was no face in the entrance, no figure waiting behind the wall, no sound except the wind and the sea. Still, I did not want to stand there for long. I started making my way back down the thin trail toward the pebble beach. Going down felt more difficult in the dark, and I moved carefully, using my phone for light when I needed it. Once I reached the beach, the stones shifted under my feet again, and the sound seemed to follow me. I kept looking back toward the promontory. The bunker was mostly hidden now, but I knew it was up there. I could feel its position behind me, like a dark shape on the edge of the coast. The walk back to town felt longer than the walk out. Maybe it was because I was tired. Maybe it was because the excitement of exploring had worn off. Or maybe it was because I could not stop thinking about the doorway. I kept replaying the feeling in my mind. It had not been dramatic. It had not been like something in a movie. No ghost had appeared. No voice had spoken. No hand had reached from the darkness. But sometimes the quiet experiences are the ones that stay with you the longest. Because you cannot prove them. You cannot explain them easily. You can only remember how your body felt in that moment and wonder why. By the time I got home, I was still thinking about it. I knew I would probably not sleep right away, so I began researching the bunker. I wanted to know more about it. I wanted to see if anyone else had felt something strange there. I wanted to know whether the place had any stories connected to it. That was when I found out the bunker was known as Scrapster Castle. At first, that confused me, because it was clearly a World War II pillbox, not a castle. But then I learned that the bunker had been built on the ruins of an old castle, one that dated back to around the 11th century. That changed the way I thought about the place immediately. I had gone there thinking I was only stepping inside a wartime structure from the 1940s. But the ground underneath it was far older, much older. The pillbox was just the newest layer. Under it was history, and not all of that history was peaceful. As I read more, I came across a story connected to the old castle. According to history, or maybe legend, a bishop had once been harmed there in a horrific way. The story said that inside that very castle, his tongue had been cut out and his eyes had been gouged. Whether the account was fully true or partly legend, it was disturbing enough to stay with me. I thought about that while remembering the bunker's small white room and the strange feeling near the doorway. It made me wonder what had been there before the pillbox. A castle would have had walls, rooms, entrances, and passageways. People would have lived there, argued there, feared there, and maybe died there. Over hundreds of years, the building would have changed, fallen, and disappeared until only ruins remained. Then, much later, during another time of fear and war, people built a defensive bunker on top of it. One place layered with different kinds of fear. The medieval castle, the wartime pillbox, the dark coastal promontory, the doorway that felt wrong. I kept searching, trying to find any reports of hauntings or paranormal experiences at Scrapster Castle. I expected to find something. Maybe a local ghost story. Maybe another explorer's account. Maybe a mention of strange feelings, voices, shadows, or a figure near the bunker. But I did not find much. I could not find clear records of the place being haunted. I could not find many people describing paranormal experiences there. There were historical mentions, but not the kind of ghost stories I expected. That almost made the experience stranger. If the place had a famous haunted reputation, I could have blamed my feelings on that. Maybe I had heard something before and forgotten it. Maybe my mind would have created fear because I already knew what I was supposed to feel. But I did not know the history when I went there. I did not know about the castle ruins. I did not know about the bishop's story. I did not know about the violence connected to the place. I only knew what I felt. And what I felt was that something was off about that doorway. This was not the first time I had experienced something like that. I have previously shared an experience I had while exploring a tunnel under a fort in England. That place gave me a similar uncomfortable feeling, the same kind of heavy uneasiness that seemed to belong to the space itself. At the time, I did not know much about that tunnel either. Later, I found out it was supposedly haunted. The place was Fort Paul in northeast England, and people had talked about strange things happening there before. That memory came back to me after the bunker. It made me wonder whether certain places carry something. Maybe not in a way that can be measured or proven, but in a way some people can feel. Old places witness things. They absorb fear, pain, waiting, violence, and loneliness. Maybe most of the time, those things fade. But maybe in some places, they remain. Not as a ghost walking around in chains, not as a face in a window, but as a pressure, a wrongness, a feeling that tells you to leave. That is how the doorway felt. I am not claiming that I saw a ghost. I am not saying a spirit followed me home or that the bunker is definitely haunted. I know how easy it is for fear and imagination to build a story out of darkness. I know that being alone at night on a remote coast can make anyone feel uneasy. The mind looks for danger when you are isolated, and sometimes it creates patterns out of shadows and silence. Maybe that is all it was. Maybe the bunker was just an old, empty pillbox on top of old ruins, and I scared myself because I went there at 11 p.m. Alone, maybe the doorway felt strange because it was the only entrance, and my brain did not like standing near an open space I could not fully see. Maybe the wind, the sea, the dark, and the loneliness all worked together to make an ordinary place feel haunted. But I also know this. The feeling was real to me. It was not spread evenly through the bunker. It was not just general fear. It was tied to that doorway. Every time I moved near it, the same uneasiness came back. Every time I turned my back to it, I felt as if something was there. I felt as if the empty entrance was not empty at all. And later, when I learned the bunker stood on the ruins of an 11th century castle, and that there was an old story of a bishop being mutilated inside that castle, the memory of that doorway became harder to dismiss. I keep thinking about how many people must have crossed that same ground over the centuries. Soldiers, fishermen, travelers, people from the castle, people from the war, people who came there with fear in their hearts for reasons I will never fully know. Maybe the doorway of the pillbox is just a doorway. Or maybe, because of where it stands, it sits over something older than the structure itself. Something that does not show up in records. Something that does not need a famous ghost story to exist. I have not decided whether I believe the bunker is haunted. I still cannot say that. There is no evidence, no clear record, and no dramatic event I can point to. All I have is the memory of standing inside that small white room at night, surrounded by graffiti and cold concrete, with the sea outside and the darkness pressing in through the doorway. But I know I felt something there. A pressure, a presence, an aura around the entrance that made me want to move away. Maybe it was only paranoia. Maybe it was only my imagination. Or maybe some places do not need to be known as haunted to make you feel that something is still standing in the doorway, waiting for someone to notice. Story 5. My husband truly believed he was some kind of reincarnated Sherlock Holmes. I used to think it was funny. At first, it was one of those harmless little habits couples laugh about. Some husbands watched football every weekend. Some spent too much money on tools they barely used. Some disappeared into video games for hours. My husband, Kyan, watched murder documentaries. Not just watched them, studied them. He would sit on the couch with a notepad in his lap, pausing every few minutes to write something down. He made timelines. He listed suspects. He circled names and drew arrows between motives, locations, and pieces of evidence. He would rewind tiny moments in interviews, convinced the person had blinked too much, looked away too fast, or used the wrong word while describing a dead relative. At first, it was almost cute. I would tease him and call him Detective Kyan. He would grin, push his glasses up his nose, and explain why the police had obviously missed the real killer. Sometimes he was serious. Sometimes he was wrong in a way that was entertaining. Sometimes I would sit beside him with a bowl of popcorn and let him talk through the case like I was his assistant. But over time, it became less funny. Every normal conversation turned into an investigation. If I misplaced my phone, he wanted to reconstruct my last movements. If the neighbor's trash can was left out too long, he had a theory about what that meant. If a waitress seemed nervous, he wondered if she had a secret. If a missing person case came on the news, he would follow it for weeks, like it was his responsibility to solve it. I couldn't even say, "The milk is gone," without him asking when I last saw it, who had access to the fridge, and whether I had noticed any suspicious behavior around breakfast. Then, recently, he changed. He still watched documentaries, but not with me anymore. He watched them alone, always in his office, always with the door closed. If I knocked, he would pause everything before answering. If I walked in too quickly, he would shut his laptop or turn the screen away. He started staying up late, whispering to himself, scribbling in notebooks, and taping things to the walls in the garage. He stopped laughing at his own theories. He stopped telling me what case he was watching. That was what bothered me most. Kyan had always wanted me to listen. He used to follow me around the house while explaining old evidence, police mistakes, and witness statements. Now, suddenly, everything was private. He told me he had a headache, I said to Jazz, who was sitting on the kitchen countertop with his legs swinging like a child on a playground. A headache. That's the excuse now. I was chopping onions for dinner, and I could hear the bitterness in my own voice. I didn't like how angry I sounded, but I couldn't stop. The knife hit the cutting board harder than it needed to. Like I know he's hiding something, I continued. Last night, he literally stopped in the middle of us being together because he said he had a light bulb moment about some cold case he won't shut up about. Except now he won't even tell me which case it is. I sliced the onion in half, peeled it, and started dicing it into small pieces. But he keeps lying. My voice dropped into a hiss. He looks me right in the face and lies. My eyes started burning from the onion. Tears blurred my vision, and I grabbed a towel to wipe them away. Bro, Jazz said with a sigh, I told you before. Stop cutting onions without your glasses. He pointed toward the kitchen table, where my glasses sat beside a pile of unopened mail. I gave him a dirty look, but I grabbed them and slid them on. Anyway, he said, leaning back on his hands, your husband is clearly a psychopath. I rolled my eyes. Jazz leaned forward again, resting his chin on his fist. There were absolutely no signs, he said in a mocking voice. None at all. Except for the fact that he spends every night watching shows called things like My Husband Was a Chainsaw Killer and I Slept Beside Him for 10 years. You're not funny, I muttered. But my stomach tightened anyway. I hated that suspicion existed inside me at all. I hated the way it had started as a tiny thought and then grown roots. I hated that every strange thing Kyan did now fed it. The closed doors, the late nights, the sudden silences when I walked into a room, the way he had become obsessed with Target, of all places. Not the whole store, just the stationery section. Pens, notebooks, tape, index cards, red string. He said he liked being organized. That was what he said. Then one of our neighbors casually mentioned that she had seen him taking the car out late at night. She said it while collecting her mail, as if it was just an odd little detail. Your husband's been busy lately, she said. I keep seeing the car leaving after midnight. I laughed awkwardly and said, well, that's weird. Then I went back inside and stood in the hallway for 10 minutes, trying not to think about where he could possibly be going. Jazz watched me from the counter as I chopped another onion. He was wearing a plain white short-sleeved shirt today, which was different. Usually when he visited, he wore the same sweater and jeans. I noticed the change, but I didn't mention it. There were a lot of things I didn't mention about Jazz. You don't want to raise a kid in a murder house, he said in a sing-song voice. The knife slipped slightly in my hand. I looked up at him. He looked back, smiling like he had said something clever. Shut up, I said, but my stomach twisted hard. Suddenly the smell of raw onion filled my mouth and nose. It was too much, too sharp, too strong. My throat closed, and I dropped the knife on the counter. I barely made it to the sink before I started throwing up. My lunch came up in painful, bitter waves. I gripped the edge of the sink. eyes watering, my throat burning. When it finally stopped, I rinsed my mouth and swallowed a glass of water, but the sour taste still clung to my tongue. Jazz hummed softly. "You're pregnant," he said. Damn, I didn't look at him. "I found out yesterday," I said. For once, Jazz was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned back again and kicked his feet lightly against the cabinet. "Okay," he said. "Tell me if I'm overstepping." "You are overstepping," I snapped, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand. He held up both hands like he was innocent. "Fine, but if I'm understanding this correctly, you want to be a mom, but you don't want the baby's father to be a murderer." I glared at him. "You are the worst roommate ever." Then I paused and looked at him sitting on my marble countertop like he owned the place. "No, not roommate. Kitchen goblin." Jazz placed the hand over his chest as if I had wounded him deeply. "I pay rent. We both know you don't." He winked. The worst part was that he wasn't wrong. About Kyan, I mean, not the rent. Jazz had never paid rent in his life. I wanted this baby. I was terrified, but I wanted it. I had only known for a day, and already there was a secret world inside me. A future, a tiny possible person. I had spent the whole morning imagining little socks, a nursery, telling Kyan in some sweet way that would make him cry and hold me. Then I remembered how he had been acting, and all that warmth curdled into fear. What if my husband was not just strange? What if he had done something? What if he was not studying killers because he wanted to catch them, but because he understood them? What if all those notebooks and late-night drives and secret boards in the garage were not about solving a mystery? What if he was hiding one? Madeline? Kyan's voice came from the front of the house, and I almost jumped out of my skin. "I'm home." Jazz's smile spread slowly. "Oh, great," he whispered. "Murder husband is back." I ignored him and forced myself to take a steady breath. Then I wiped my hands on a towel and called, "Hi, honey." Kyan walked into the kitchen a few seconds later. He looked normal. That was the terrible thing. He always looked normal. Handsome, tired, sweet in that distracted way I used to love. His dark hair was messy from work, and he still had his coat half on. "Babe," he said. Before I could move, he wrapped his arms around me from behind and pressed his face into my neck. The closeness startled me. My body went soft out of habit, even though my mind stayed sharp. His hands rested on my waist, warm and familiar. He kissed the side of my throat, and my breath caught. "I've been thinking about you all day," he murmured. The knife slid from my clammy fingers and landed on the counter with a dull sound. For a moment, I forgot to be afraid. Maybe it was the hormones. Maybe it was the fear turning into something else because I didn't know where to put it. Maybe I just needed him to feel like my husband again. He kissed me, and I kissed him back. Jazz groaned behind us. "Seriously?" he said. "Right in front of my salad?" Kyan didn't react, of course. He never reacted to Jazz. He took my hand and pulled me toward the stairs. I let him. We went upstairs, and for a little while I tried not to think. I tried not to think about the secret laptop, the late-night car rides, the stationery, the murder documentaries, or the baby I still had not told him about. But even then, something was wrong. Kyan was there, but not completely. His body was with me, but his mind was somewhere else. He didn't look into my eyes the way he usually did. He seemed tense, distracted, almost excited. Like part of him was waiting for a thought to finish forming. Then, in the middle of it, he froze. His eyes went wide. "That's it," he whispered. My stomach dropped. He pulled away from me and sat upright, breathing hard, not from desire anymore, but from excitement. "I've solved it," he said. I stared at him. He jumped off the bed and started grabbing his clothes. "Kyan," I said carefully. "Solved what?" He turned to me with a grin that looked almost wild. "Do you remember that cold case I was talking about?" I didn't answer. He barely waited for one. "You'll have to see this," he said. He dragged me downstairs, past the kitchen, past Jazz, who had moved from the counter and was now leaning against the doorway with his arms folded. Kyan pulled me toward the garage door. My heart started beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. I did not want to go into that garage. For weeks, the garage had been his private place. The door was always shut. He said he was working on storage, then on a project, then on some old boxes. I had not pushed because marriage has little boundaries, and I thought that was one of his. Now, as he opened the door, I smelled paper, dust, marker ink, and cold concrete. He flipped on the light. The entire wall was covered. Newspaper clippings, printed photos, maps, sticky notes, timelines, and red string stretched across a huge board nailed into the wall. Some pictures were old and grainy. Some were school photos. Some were crime scene images blurred by photocopying. Names were circled. Dates were underlined. Arrows connected people to places, to statements. I stood there in silence.